Welcome. Today I'm going to talk about shading your still life. As you can see, I have my drawing here. I'm almost done with it. And I have my still life with a light set up next to it. Um, I've arched the light so that I'm getting a nice dramatic shadow. Remember, I'm expecting that each of your pieces has a cast shadow, which is the shadow that is hitting the ground, and some highlight on it. So you might want to take a picture of your setup. The light might be changing from day to day a little bit, so do your best to get the same light situation. I also have the lights turned off in my classroom. So the first thing I did is erase some of these grid lines. I'm not completely done with my drawing yet, so I didn't erase all of them, but I'm doing my best to erase those grid lines. And I'm going to start shading this. Notice what's a mid-tone, what's your lightest tone, and what is your darkest tone. So when I study this whole still life, if I were to say what was darkest, I'd say probably the pants on my little Pinocchio guy, some of the keys over here. The bow and the wrench are both, if you were to take a black and white picture, I'd say a mid-tone. The shadows are also some of my darkest tones. So what I'm going to do is I might start just shading this with a mid-tone. When I go to shade, I'm going to keep a constant direction. I'm going to use my pencil. It's nice and sharp, kind of sideways to create that mid-tone on the body of the wrench. Another thing that you might want to do is draw your shadows. So in addition to creating this mid-tone throughout, I might want to go through and draw out where I see the shadow. Don't make this a hard line. You want to make it kind of a soft line to show you where the shadow goes. Eventually, I'll let the shadow kind of peter out when I shade it. So that's where I see the shadow going. Notice that I'm not recording where the wrench goes off the page outside of the border. So let's say I'm ready to start the shadow, the cast shadow. If I look at the shadow, it kind of has a hard edge and then it peters out. So I might start off next to my shape, and I'm going to use a firm but steady movement, and I'm going dark, and then as I move outward from the object, I'm going to lighten up. So I'm kind of fading this out. So I'm going dark to light. So I'm going to pause my video here, and I'm going to continue working, and when I come back, I'll show you how my wrench comes out. So as I'm moving through the wrench, a few areas come up that I want to share with you. First of all, you'll notice on my piece that it's all kind of mid-tone, but when I look over here, you can see that it gets darker as it goes over to the side, and then there's also some highlight. So if you've not created any highlight in here, and then also it gets much darker in these spaces here. So I'm actually going to take these quite a bit darker in these recessed areas. So when I look here, this should go a little bit darker. So you can always go back and darken things up by going back over them with your pencil. Again, try to remember to use a rhythmic motion. I still want to make comparisons. So the cast shadow is still darker than the shadow on here. Not by much, but the darkness over here is darker than here. The other thing you'll notice is there's a highlight here. So I kind of left that part out. So I can go back in gently with my eraser and bring in a little bit of lightness over here. So if I notice I went a little too dark, you can use your eraser to create that highlight too. And I can go back through and kind of blend it in a little bit more. Now I'm going to go into these recessed areas, and you can see again that they're quite a bit darker. As I finish up the wrench, and I'm still working on it a bit, I did start to do the shadow, and as you can see, I've softened it so that it's clearly a shadow and not an object. It's also one of the darkest things on the item. Some other areas that I noticed a lot of darks were in the little crevices of the wrench, where there's some overlap that might cause some darkness. And in some recessed areas, such as these deeper areas, it's also quite dark, almost as dark as the shadow. So really examine the piece and say to yourself, where are my medium tones? So if I was going to take a black and white photo of this, when I look at it, where would my medium tones be? Where might my brightest areas be? Where are the areas that are reflective? And then where are my areas that are darkest? Regardless of whatever color the object is, it's going to have mediums, darks, and lights. And you also need to look at the relationship of the object to the other things on the page. Um, Again, this little Pinocchio guy and the key, some of the keys might be much darker than this. So I want to keep this more of a medium tone, although the shadow is certainly going to be just as dark as some of the shadows over here.